At no point in the window, the 6-year window of this budget, do they expect to balance the budget whatsoever. The parliamentary budget officer found that at the current spending pre-pandemic, they would only balance in 2070. We have an aging population. We have the lowest GDP per capita of, I think, the entire G20. Like, we're falling further and further behind. We're not as innovative as we used to be. We're not as competitive as we used to be. We're not as productive as we used to be. And like, all those are big words to say people who are working aren't making more. People who are working aren't able to produce more goods and more services for our economy for the same amount of work. So they gotta work even harder just to get the same output. And with inflation running at over 5% and actual real GDP growth under 2%, like those numbers, basically we're falling behind. We're falling behind our competitors like the Americans, like Japan, like the United Kingdom. And when you fall behind, that just means that in the future, you gotta work even harder to catch up.
Adam Soos here for Rebel News, and in just a few moments, I'm going to be joined by MP Tom Kmiec to talk about the Liberal Budget 2022. It is a budget riddled with environmental activism and spending on a level that will leave future generations indebted. Many of us know the Liberals are spending a lot, but I'm very much looking forward to sitting down with Tom to break down some of those concerning costs. I know lots of folks out there are probably concerned about the budget, but maybe haven't had a chance to break down some of the details, don't know why they're concerned. They just know the Liberals are spending way too much money and that something needs to be done about it. Why should people be concerned? Is it just more of the same from the Liberals?
So it is more of the same, Adam. It's our first NDP federal budget that we've ever had.
The elements of the deal are what we use our power to achieve that should be in the budget, and we emphasize what we expected to be there.
So first of all, when you look at the budget spending in there, you're talking about a $52.8 billion deficit in this fiscal year. You're talking almost like just a smidge off $40 billion next year. I still remember back in 2015 where they promised to run teensy-weensy little deficits of $10 billion. And in 2019, they would have a balanced budget.
He said the budget will balance itself. He has no idea what he is talking about when it comes to these things. That's why you could be sure that his small deficits will become large deficits and would get Canada into the same pickle.
Now, they've had a pandemic since then, sure, so that's a fine excuse to use, but they have no plans whatsoever to ever balance the budget. And if you take all of their projections, they're not set to balance the budget anytime before 2070.
There's this troubling truck tax.
Justin Trudeau's Liberal government is talking about bringing in a new truck tax.
It's come to light that their big so-called environment plan tabled last week is, of course, yet another tax grab, this one targeting the millions of Canadians who buy and depend on pickups and other heavy vehicles to get to work and to do their jobs, to get around.
Which it seems like sort of the mentality of Liberal elites. Well, the trucks are sort of a toy you have, and therefore we can put a tax on them. But for those of us out west, they're very often essential work tools, whether it's to get up to remote drill sites or to literally haul livestock, whatever it may be. Trucks are fundamental to their work. Talk about that a little bit.
It's nickel and diming of Canadians. It's pretty typical. And this type of tax obviously will have a bigger impact on Westerners because a lot of us, like you said, we use trucks for work. And it's great. At a time when they're saying that we're having a hard time getting more supply of housing onto the market.
The federal government needs to work hard to find ways to break the barriers to increasing housing supply. And that is exactly what this budget does.
Well, last time I checked, guys who work in construction, they drive trucks usually because they need to bring their tools around. And when you add on to their costs, they're just going to pass that on to their foreman. They're going to pass it on to the people hiring them to do framing, the guys who do cabinetry, the guys who bring in the plumbing, the guys who do the HVAC. They all use trucks to move around, to move their equipment around, bring the parts of the house they're trying to build. So they're all going to pass on that cost on to the end user, the end consumer who's buying the house. This is why it's so ridiculous. And just like on a more personal side, all of us use trucks out here because first of all, we have crazy winters out in Calgary, but Edmonton's not much better. And I remember getting stuck in the snow on my tiny little Volkswagen Passat that I should have taken my Jeep Commander, but I didn't. I took my Passat out onto a farm and thank goodness they had a big truck to pull me out of the snow. But that's the experience out west. When we go out into these smaller communities, you don't have the luxury of having somebody clear your streets. And the Liberals just need to figure this out. Stop going after the working class, the working stiffs who are just trying to earn an honest day's living, and the ones who are building our homes, or making sure we have fuel at the pump stations, bringing our our groceries to our grocery stores. Like, that's the type of ridiculous stuff. They need to stop nickel and diming people.
Let's be clear about the facts. The price on pollution means more money in Canadians' pockets and less pollution in our air.
We are committed to fighting against climate change and reducing emissions, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's also the only thing to do to make sure that there are good jobs in Alberta.
What are some of the more troubling taxes that are being brought about in light of the sort of green agenda of this government?
Well, the carbon tax went up again April 1st, so it's going to keep going up every single year. That adds just over a dozen cents to a liter of gasoline. It makes your diesel more expensive as well. That's going to keep going up every single year. It's based on an escalator tax, which means it automatically goes up every single year unless the government chooses not to make it go up. And we now know from the parliamentary budget officer that actually the people paying the most are Albertans. We're the ones who are getting stuck with their bill because it applies to Alberta, Saskatchewan, to every single province that doesn't have its own carbon tax because our provincial government said no. I think what's more like on the climate change side, I think the thing to pay attention to most in this budget is they have a carbon capture sequestration. Western Canada, we're known for high tech in oil and gas. A lot of really smart people have been investing a ton of money into this, big, small, medium sized companies in energy. We're the king in Canada at this. This is what we're the best at. And now they're excluding enhanced oil recovery. So if you want to do carbon capture sequestration, you want to do your part for the environment, you're a medium-sized company, you're invested into it. The government's saying, yeah, we'll come alongside you and, make it easier to finance the project. But if you commit the cardinal sin of trying to extract more oil, you're not eligible for a single penny of tax relief for trying to do the right thing, which is sequester some carbon. But if you're trying to do it to enhance your oil recovery in a couple of wells that you have, no, you can't do that. That's not allowed. While the Americans are offering top-rate tax treatment and are taking our jobs. So we got to decide, are we serious about carbon capture sequestration? Do we want to do our part for the environment in a way that makes total sense, using really high-tech technology? Or do we want the Americans to keep taking our jobs?
Canada will seize the opportunities in the green transition. And so much of that seizing of opportunities is going to happen here in Calgary, is going to happen here in Alberta. The world economy, our trading partners, they have decided that their economies are going to go green. And this is a huge, huge transformation. It is the biggest transformation of the global economy since the Industrial Revolution.
The sort of sentiment of Western alienation, even the sort of notion of Western separation, has perhaps been on the fringes before, but under Justin Trudeau, it's been magnified and is likely stronger than ever. Is there anything in this budget that whether it be equalization or anything else, that makes Alberta feel a little bit closer to being part of Canada, or is it just more alienation, more exclusion?
So I think we're again going to be asked to foot the bill for a lot of the spending that's going to be going on. Equalization is going to keep going up because it's based on nominal GDP, which is unadjusted for inflation. And those are rules that were set back way before the pandemic, way before this huge boost in royalty prices. That's when you have to change equalization. That's why we're waiting to see what's in the Budget Implementation Act, to see the mechanics that are going to be involved.
Albertans are frustrated. They have a right to be. That is why I tabled the Equalization and Transfers Fairness Act as a first step in getting Albertans a fair deal in Confederation. Studies show the future of equalization is the fiscal convergence of our fiscal capacity. We are all getting poorer thanks to bad Liberal policies. Let's secure the future of Albertans and vote yes on my bill C-263 and get a fair deal for Albertans in Confederation.
We're footing the bill for a lot of what's going to be going on. It's not just us in Alberta, it's Saskatchewan, it's British Columbia, and it's also Ontario. Ontario's going to be asked to foot the bill for a lot of what's going on in the budget. So it's not just us, it's a lot of hard-working Canadians from coast to coast who are going to be asked to foot the bill for more Liberal spending. And what the Liberals are doing in this budget is they're buying the votes of NDP MPs so they can continue to be in power for the next 2 to 3 years.
So you're making a choice here. You're
No,
saying,
no, no.
look,
The choice when the Liberals are making a choice.
well, wait,
The
you
Liberals,
can't have both. You
they
can't
are in
claim
government.
credit for their policies when you like them.
Absolutely, we
and,
can.
and then not take credit when you don't
That's
like them.
exactly what we're going to do.
But you're keeping them in
No,
power.
no, no.
This is a bit of an aside from the budget itself, but I wanted to talk about the Baie du Nord approval, which for folks out there who are unfamiliar is basically offshore drilling in the ocean, somewhat problematic.
Newfoundland and Labrador, where the federal government has approved the Bay du Nord offshore oil mega project. The project expected to create much needed jobs and help tackle the province's huge debt. However, environmentalists are infuriated, saying it flies in the face of the federal government's climate goals.
We in Alberta can't get our safe, ethical oil. We can't get a pipeline built. But in a direct contradiction, and when you juxtapose this, it's just apparent how alienated the West is, because the East can tank in oil, OPEC oil. The East can drill offshore. We've got our ethical oil. We've got these sound solutions. We've got these carbon capture technologies, and we're being excluded from piping our own oil across the country. Would you care to comment on that?
So I'll first say, like, Bay du Nord getting approved was amazing news for Canadian energy, and I consider Newfoundland Labrador honorary members of Western Canada. They feel the same type of alienation as we do. They had to fight tooth and nail just to get this small project approved, a project that's not going to produce oil till like 2026, 2027. It has well over 100 conditions placed upon it, including it has to be a carbon net zero project. When it starts producing oil. I mean, I don't fault them one bit. Newfoundland Labrador needed this project to get thousands of Newfoundlanders back to work. I'm not angry at them at all. They absolutely deserve that type of prosperity, but we deserve the same at home here in Alberta. And I expect that the federal government, next time there's a major energy project out there that wants to get approved, that they're going to give us the same type of consideration they gave to Newfoundland Labrador. But we know that with Stephen Guilbeault and Wilkinson in charge of the dual natural resource and environment file, we're never going to get a fair shake out of them. And that's why we need to replace them with a strong majority national conservative government. That's the only way we're going to get all of our people back to work.
What is with the underlying lack of sort of practical steps? Because if someone cared about the environment, what the Liberal government's proposing doesn't provide any solutions.
We need to step up in our fight against climate change. We need to make investments to prepare the future, and that's exactly what we are doing.
They never seem to have a direct association with reducing emissions. It's just taxes, taxes, taxes. All it does is funnel more money into their coffers.
That's the typical NDP Liberal solution to everything, is more government. If there's somebody out there who needs some help, they offer another government program. Like, a perfect example is this dental care plan that they're offering.
It's not right that in Canada, whether or not you can get a rotten tooth fixed depends on what your income is, or whether or not you have insurance.
I don't know about you, but I checked on every single provincial government's website. None of them have been asking for a dental care plan. All of them are running their own provincial plans, but the federal government seems to think they can do a better job at running a dental insurance plan. I don't know about you too, but insurance business, it's a tough business to be in. You have good years, you have bad years. And frankly, if they want to put the same people in charge of our CRA taxes, or the people who specialize in procurement of defense material and equipment for our personnel in uniform, they want to put them in charge of a dental care plan, no thank you. I don't think they're going to do a good job of it either.
I don't know. When I think about the biggest, most important economic policy this government, if re-elected, would move forward, you'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy.
During the pandemic, the central bank printed up about $370 billion by buying financial assets like Government of Canada debt. So it sure seems like Ottawa is using the printing press to finance a good chunk of its deficits. And that means that Ottawa is financing some of its deficits by devaluing your money.
The very real generational toll that this will take. Like, these are debts that families will be paying off. They're borrowing from your children and your children's children. How bad is it? And is the amount of money they're planning on spending, is it ever going to be repaid?
So probably not until you get some type of conservative government. I mean, when you go through Freeland's speech, when she was giving her speech on the budget, it's a tradition, right, that the finance minister gives it. She talked about this being a responsible budget.
This budget is a fiscally responsible budget.
I laughed. I was one of those who was laughing. There's nothing responsible in this budget. It's $1.3 trillion of debt at the end of this time cycle of what they're proposing to spend in the budget. 1.3 trillion is double what it was back in 2015. You're talking in the T's and the trillions. It's a huge amount of money that we owe. And that doesn't include provincial government debt. That doesn't include municipal government debt. Like, we now owe on the public debt side way more money than this entire economy is able to create in wealth all in 1 year. It's about $1,200 to $1,400 per person more. Now, we know that not every single person is earning an income, right? Our children aren't working, but they owe money as well. So if you just limit it down to those people earning an income every single year, running a business, they owe an incredible amount of money just at the end of this fiscal year. They're cutting off flow-through shares for energy companies, which is really going to hurt us in the West, especially in a small and medium company size. They've got a bunch of new gimmicks that they've come up with on the housing side.
In tomorrow's budget, you will see significant investments in housing, in supports for families, in a way that continues to grow our economy for families from coast to coast to coast for years to come.
The problem is the Liberals' housing programs are helping no one. Young people like David are not interested in programs like sharing the equity of their home with the government. In fact, it would appear that not many people across the country are interested. There's only been 9 applications to the shared equity housing program. It's a bit of an embarrassment, Mr. Speaker.
And some of their big ticket items aren't even in here. National Farmer Care doesn't appear anywhere. That's about $11.1 billion of new spending on top of everything else that they're proposing to do. At no point in the window, the 6-year window of this budget, do they expect to balance the budget whatsoever. The parliamentary budget officer found that at the current spending pre-pandemic, they would only balance in 2070. We have an aging population. We have the lowest GDP per capita of, I think, the entire G20. Like, we're falling further and further behind. We're not as innovative as we used to be. We're not as competitive as we used to be. We're not as productive as we used to be. And like, all those are big words to say people who are working aren't making more. People who are working aren't able to produce more goods and more services for our economy for the same amount of work. So they got to work even harder just to get the same output. And with inflation running at over 5% and actual real GDP growth under 2%, like, those numbers, basically, we're falling behind. We're falling behind our competitors, like the Americans, like Japan, like the United Kingdom. And when you fall behind, that just means that in the future, you got to work even harder to catch up. And if you're a young person today, if you're someone who's under 40, you haven't bought a house just yet, this is an awful budget for you. If you're looking to buy a home sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to be really hard done by what they're doing here.
2021 was a boom year. 667,000 residential properties changed hands that year, a 30% increase over a 10-year average. Average prices went from $434,000 to $811,000, an 81% inflation increase. And the Prime Minister's solution is a scheme from the CMHC called the First Time Home Buyers Incentive that was supposed to help 100,000 Canadians, but government documents show that it's only helped 14,000. They expanded the criteria 3 times.
You are not going to be able to buy a house with any of these government programs they've introduced. It's more demand side objectives they've put themselves. It's going to increase the amount of people trying to buy a house, trying to get into the market before interest rates get completely out of hand as the Bank of Canada will try to get a control on inflation. And that just spells more bad news for working class Canadians who are under 40 because they got to work that much harder to try and eke out a living while being saddled with all these future debts for consumption we're doing today.
Obviously, the Conservative Party currently under a leadership race, so some of the policies yet to be formed. But what would the Conservative Party of Canada do differently? How? Because obviously there's cuts or there's efficiencies. Things have to be done to not spend that money, or at least not new active actions have to be taken. What would the Conservatives do differently on a budget?
If we were to spend on defense, like back in 2014 when the F-35 project was approved by the Harper government, had we purchased those aircraft back then, we would have saved almost $2 billion by now in not having bought those used Australian CF-18s, a 40-year-old airframe with rust problems in it. We wouldn't have purchased those. We wouldn't have had all of these delays, and getting an aircraft that 7 years afterwards proved to have been the right decision to make. We would have bought the equipment when we needed it and not incurred all of these costs after the fact. It's all of these little decisions that accumulate. I always tell people back home, in Calgary, when I meet them, I'm going to have a coffee meetup with them sometime next few weeks, is waste in government starts with millions, then it becomes billions. And if you're ever wondering, like, what, Tom, I just want to ask the question, can't you just cut 50 billion? I go, it starts with the millions. You got to literally go line item by line item to see where you can save money. For that, you need to be literally in government. You need to have control of the entire civil service so they can feed you all of the information. You got to change government programs, and you got to stop introducing new ones. That's just being fiscally responsible, unlike what they're doing. Like you said, we have a leadership race going on. There's over 10 candidates competing. All of them have different ideas on how they would actually achieve all of these goals. And from my end, I have to stay neutral in the leadership race, so I don't want to prejudice or prejudge what they may or may not propose. I think it just goes back to very simple practices. Don't announce new programs when there's no demand for them. Don't go out and blow your budget on a particular line item when there is, these other competing cost pressures on you. All the pandemic response programs that we had are being wound down. We're supposedly in a sixth wave, and the government's already feeling the pressure to restart all of these programs. You can't do all these things. You got to manage for a future emergency, and the Liberals haven't been doing that because they've been basically just kind of bouncing like a ball moving through a pinball machine from crisis to crisis to crisis. That's not the way you manage things, and you can't expect Canadians to keep shouldering more and more of the debt. One of the lines that Prime Minister Trudeau used at the very beginning of the pandemic is, we borrowed so Canadians wouldn't have to. That's completely false. There's only one taxpayer in this country. We all bear the responsibility for the debt that's incurred in our names. That's what governments are doing right now. Huge amounts of debt that they've incurred. Basically taking from tomorrow to consume today, and that's not the way you're supposed to do things.
Well, if we ever want to overcome the massive debts and deficits resulting from Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party of Canada's extreme spending budget, we need strong Conservative leadership. And the leadership race is well underway for the Conservative Party of Canada. If you want to catch all of our reports on Canada deciding who will be the next leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, you can find all that at leadershipreports.ca. This is a message for all the dads, the grandfathers, the husbands, the sons, the daughters out there. Just a warning, Mother's Day is going to be on us sooner than you'd expect. And what better gift can you get for your mother than something incredible from the Rebel News Store at rebelnewsstore.com. We have unisex as well as women's cuts, so there's something for everybody, some incredible designs, whatever their passion be, whether that be social conservatism, fiscal responsibility, protecting these pastors, just supporting and representing Rebel News broadly. Any gift you get there, one your mom or grandma is sure to love. And two, it also helps our independent journalism. So you're helping out in so many incredible ways. And now we actually have a buy one, get one 25% promotion. You can enter the code MOM25 to get that deal. So you can get a really nice shirt for mom and let's say a mug for grandma at 25% off. Get all your Mother's Day shopping done in one spot. Again, it's MOM25 at rebelnewsstore.com.